When I discovered my husband had been living with my sister just 12 miles away for 6 years while I thought he was working in North Carolina, my first reaction wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was the strangest sense of relief, like finally understanding why a puzzle piece never quite fit, even though I'd been forcing it into place my whole married life. My name is Evelyn Marie Parker, and at 70 years old, I'm still learning that some betrayals are so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that they become their own kind of prison for everyone involved. This is the story of how I discovered mine and how I built something better from the ruins. You know, they say truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you bury it. Well, mine came floating up on a Tuesday afternoon in June, delivered by my neighbor Mrs. Chen while I was watering the gardenias Thomas had planted for our 30th anniversary. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To really understand what happened, you need to know how a woman can live beside a lie for 6 years and never see it, even when it was breathing the same Miami air just a few neighborhoods over. I want to ask you something before we go any further into this story. If you're watching this because you believe real experiences matter, because these stories of women finding their strength deserve to be heard, please take just a second to hit that like button. It's free, it takes one click, and it helps this channel reach other women who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Your support means everything, and I'm grateful you're here with me today. Now, let me take you back to where this really began. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida in 1954, the first daughter of Margaret and Robert Turner. My childhood was the kind you see in old photographs, all washed out colors and genuine smiles. The kind is simple that people today think is fiction. My father worked at the naval station, and my mother kept house and raised us 3 girls with an iron will wrapped in floral aprons. We weren't rich, but we had enough, and that's what mattered in those days. My sister Linda came along 5 years after me in 1959, and from the moment she could walk, she was chasing something I couldn't quite name. While I was content to help Mama in the kitchen or read on the porch, Linda was always pushing boundaries, always wanting more than what our little corner of Jacksonville could offer. Our youngest sister, Patricia, was born in 1963, but she moved to Oregon in the 80s, and we lost touch. Sometimes families scatter like dandelion seeds, and no amount of wishing brings them back. I met Thomas Parker in the spring of 1978 at a church social. I was 24, working as a receptionist at a dental office, and starting to feel that particular pressure single women felt back then, that sense that time was somehow running out, even though I was barely into my 20s. Thomas was 26, tall and solid, with hands that showed he knew hard work. He was a construction worker, building the new developments that were springing up all over Florida like wildflowers after rain. He had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room, and Lord help me, I fell for it completely. We courted for 8 months, proper and sweet, and married in January of 1979 at the First Baptist Church with my family and his small crew of friends filling the pews. Linda was my maid of honor, wearing a pale yellow dress that made her look like captured sunshine. I remember thinking she outshone me even on my wedding day, but I didn't mind then. I was in love, and love makes you generous in ways you don't even notice. We moved to Miami later that year when Thomas got a supervisor position with a growing construction company. It was exciting, starting fresh in a bigger city, making our little apartment in Kendall into a home. I got a job at a pediatrician's office, and Thomas worked long hours, but we were building something. At least, that's what I thought. The years pass the way they do when you're living them, not really noticing the pattern until you look back. We never had children, though we tried for years. There were 2 miscarriages in the early 80s that left holes in our lives we learned to step around rather than fill. Thomas threw himself into work, and I threw myself into making our house perfect, joining committees at church, volunteering at the library. We were busy, which is a wonderful way to avoid looking too closely at what you have. Linda moved to Miami in 1985, 26 years old and fresh from her second divorce. She'd always had trouble settling, always chasing some idea of happiness that seemed to move just as she reached for it. I helped her find an apartment, helped her get on her feet, got her a job at the real estate office where my friend Carol worked. That's what family does, right? You help each other. She'd come over for dinner every Sunday, and Thomas would joke with her, and I'd make pot roast the way Mama taught me, and everything seemed normal. Linda got her real estate license, started doing well for herself, bought a little condo in Coral Gables. She came around less after that, busy with her own life, but we still talked on the phone, still saw each other for birthdays and holidays. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up wearing a sign. It comes in wearing the face of ordinary life, and it waits. Thomas and I settled into our 50s, then our 60s, and our marriage was like a comfortable old sweater, worn thin in places, but familiar. We didn't fight much. We didn't talk much either, if I'm being honest. We existed side by side, 2 people who'd signed up for a journey together and were tired to question if we were still heading the same direction. In 2016, Thomas came home one evening in November with news. The construction company wanted to expand their operations in North Carolina, and they needed experienced supervisors willing to relocate for a few years. The pay was excellent, he said. We could bank the extra money, really secure our retirement. But the position was just for him, no provisions for spouses, and the work would be demanding, long hours, not worth me uprooting my life for. I remember standing in our kitchen, the one I'd repainted 3 times over 37 years, and feeling something twist in my chest. But Thomas was looking at me with those earnest eyes, explaining how this was our chance. How we'd finally have enough for a comfortable retirement, maybe even that RV we'd talked about. And what was I supposed to say? That I was afraid? That something felt wrong? You don't question your husband's ambition, especially not when you've been raised to believe that supporting your man is your primary purpose. So I said yes. And I watched him pack up his belongings into boxes, watched him load his truck in January of 2017, and I stood in our driveway waving goodbye as he drove off toward what he said was North Carolina. He was 68 years old, and I was 62, and I believed every single word. The first year wasn't so bad. Thomas called every Sunday evening, regular as clockwork, telling me about the construction sites, the crews he was managing, the small apartment he'd rented in Charlotte. He sent money home every month, more than he'd been making before, which seemed to prove his story true. I deposited those checks, paid our bills, and tried not to notice how quiet the house had become. Linda called me more often during that time, checking in, inviting me to lunch. I thought it was sweet, thought maybe my little sister was finally growing into the kind of woman who valued family. We'd meet at little cafes in South Miami, and she'd tell me about her real estate deals, and I'd tell her about my volunteer work at the library. And neither of us mentioned how Thomas's absence had created this space for us to be closer. Or maybe I noticed it, but I pushed it down into that place where women store all the things they know but can't quite afford to acknowledge. He came home for Christmas that first year, stayed for 10 days, and seemed tired but satisfied. We went through the motions of the holiday, attended church services, had Linda over for Christmas dinner. I remember watching them across the table, Thomas and my sister, laughing at some joke I'd missed, and feeling something cold whisper through my chest. But I ignored it. You get good at ignoring things when your marriage depends on not looking too close. The second year was harder. Thomas's visits became shorter and less frequent. He blamed the demanding schedule, the important projects, the difficulty of getting away. Our phone calls became briefer too, filled with more silence than words. I started to notice how he never gave me an address, just a P.O. box for mail. How he never suggested I visit. How vague he was about details when I asked questions. But the checks kept coming, and isn't that what mattered? Financial security, practical support. That's what I told myself, lying alone in our bed, listening to the house settle and creak around me. By the third year, I was having dreams. Strange, unsettling dreams, where I was searching for Thomas in a city I couldn't recognize, where every door I opened led to an empty room. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, and I'd tell myself I was being silly, that this was just the natural anxiety of a long-distance separation. Women had survived worse, I reasoned. Military wives did this all the time. I could be strong. Linda was around more and more, stopping by with groceries she said were extra from her shopping, inviting me to movies and dinner. I appreciated it, I really did, but there was something about the way she asked about Thomas, something that felt less like concern and more like checking a boxes on some invisible list. I couldn't quite name it, that feeling, so I let it slide into that growing pile of things I wasn't examining. The fourth year brought the pandemic, and suddenly Thomas had a perfect excuse for why he couldn't come home, why our calls had to be shorter, why everything was so complicated. The whole world was complicated, wasn't it? I couldn't argue with a global crisis. I stayed home, wore my mask to the grocery store, and told myself that once this was over, things would go back to normal. Except normal is a fiction we tell ourselves to make it through the day. Normal was already broken. I just didn't know how badly. It was in the fifth year that the real cracks started showing, the ones I couldn't ignore, even with all my practice. Thomas's calls became sporadic, sometimes coming on Tuesday instead of Sunday, sometimes skipping a week altogether. When I questioned it, he'd get defensive, tell me the job was stressful, that I didn't understand the pressure he was under. And I'd back down, because that's what I'd learned to do over 40-plus years of marriage. The money still came, though, and I held on to that like a lifeline. As long as the checks arrived, everything had to be okay. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. Linda started acting strange that year, too. She'd come over and seem nervous, distracted. Once, I found her in our bedroom, standing in front of Thomas's dresser, just staring at it. When I asked what she was doing, she jumped like I'd caught her stealing, said she was just remembering all the family gatherings we'd had here. It was a weak excuse, but I was too tired to push. I was tired a lot by then, tired of questions without answers, tired of sleeping alone, tired of this half-life I was living. The sixth year, the year everything shattered, started off seeming like it might be better. Thomas called in January and said he thought he'd be able to come home for good by summer, that the project was winding down. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a little flutter of hope, fragile as a butterfly wing. I started planning, thinking about how I'd fix up the house, how we'd finally start that retirement we'd been postponing. But then spring came and the excuses started again. Just a few more months, one more project. The company needed him, and that hope I'd let myself feel started to curdle into something darker, something that tasted like suspicion. I started noticing things I'd been too numb to see before. How Linda never talked about her own love life anymore. How she'd gotten vague about where she'd been or what she'd been doing. How she'd sometimes smell like men's cologne when she hugged me goodbye. A scent that felt familiar in a way I couldn't place. One Tuesday in early May, I was at the grocery store and I saw a man from behind who looked so much like Thomas it made my heart stop. Same height, same build, same way of standing with his weight on one leg. I almost called out to him, but then he turned, and of course it wasn't Thomas. Couldn't be. Thomas was in North Carolina. But that moment planted something in my mind, a nervous seed of doubt that began to grow, whether I watered it or not. I started paying attention to things I'd let slide. I noticed that Linda never asked specific questions about Thomas anymore. Never said things like, "How's his apartment?" or "What's Charlotte like?" She'd ask, "How is he?" in this vague way, like she already knew the answer but was pretending she didn't. I noticed that the return address on Thomas's letters was still that P.O. box, even after 6 years. I noticed that he'd never once suggested I fly out for a visit, not even for a weekend. And I noticed that the money he sent, while generous, came from a local Miami bank, not from North Carolina. That detail had been there all along, printed right on the checks, but I hadn't let myself see it. Our minds are remarkable things, capable of the most elaborate self-deception when the truth is too painful to bear. By June, I was having full-blown anxiety about it all, lying awake at night, my mind spinning through scenarios. I'd pick up the phone to call Thomas, then put it down, afraid of what I might hear in his voice if I asked the wrong questions. I'd draft texts to Linda, then delete them. I was paralyzed by my own fear, trapped between wanting to know and being terrified of what knowing might cost me. The truth came on a Tuesday afternoon, June 13th to be exact. I remember because it was exactly 6 years and 5 months since Thomas had driven away. I was outside watering the gardenias, those same plants he'd put in for our anniversary all those years ago. They bloomed every summer, white and fragrant, and I'd kept them alive even though they reminded me of everything I'd lost. Mrs. Chen from next door came out to get her mail, and we exchanged our usual pleasantries. She was 75, a widow, and we'd been neighbors for almost 20 years. She asked about Thomas, the way she always did, and I gave my practiced response. Still working in North Carolina, doing well. But that day, Mrs. Chen got this peculiar look on her face, puzzled and uncomfortable. "North Carolina?" she said. "But honey, I saw him at the Publix on Coral Way just last week. He was with a woman, shopping like they lived together. I called out, but I don't think he heard me." The garden hose slipped from my hand, spraying water across the sidewalk. "That couldn't have been Thomas," I said automatically. "He's in North Carolina. You must have seen someone who looks like him." Mrs. Chen shook her head slowly, her face full of pity that I couldn't bear to acknowledge. Evelyn, I've known Thomas for 20 years. I know what he looks like. And the woman he was with, I didn't want to say anything, but wasn't that your sister, Linda?" The world didn't spin. It didn't tilt. It just stopped, completely and utterly stopped, and I was floating in that stopped moment, everything suspended around me. The smell of gardenias suddenly made me nauseated. The sunshine felt like an angry interrogation light. And Mrs. Chin's kind, wrinkled face was showing me a truth I'd been running from for 6 years. "When?" I heard myself ask. "When did you see them?" "Last Tuesday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. They had a shopping cart full of groceries, the kind you buy when you're shopping for a household, not just yourself. Evelyn, dear, are you all right? You've gone pale." I wasn't all right. I would never be all right again, not in the way I had been. But I managed to nod, managed to make some excuse about needing to get inside, managed to walk through my door with my legs moving on autopilot while my mind tried to process what I'd just heard. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table Thomas and I had eaten breakfast at for decades, the same table where Linda had sat every Sunday for years. And I started to understand. Not just the fact of the betrayal, but the angry scope of it, the calculated nature of it. 6 years! They'd been together for 6 years, living their life just miles away, while I sat in our house, watering his flowers, believing his lies. The checks, the phone calls, the visits, all of it carefully orchestrated to keep me placid, keep me unquestioning, keep me playing the role of the faithful wife, waiting for her husband to come home. And Linda, my sister, my baby sister who I'd helped and supported and loved, she'd been part of it all along. Every lunch, every phone call, every concerned visit had been part of the performance. I thought about all those times she'd smelled like cologne. I thought about her standing in front of Thomas's dresser. I thought about how she never asked specific questions because she already knew all the answers. She knew because she was living them. The rage came then, finally. A hot wave of it that made my hand shake and my vision blur. But underneath the rage was something else, something that felt almost like liberation. Because Mrs. Chin hadn't just revealed the betrayal, she'd given me something I'd lost 6 years ago without even realizing it. The right to stop pretending everything was fine. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a strange state of calm, my mind working through implications and timelines. If Thomas was in Miami, where exactly was he living? How many people knew? Had I been the only fool, or had they managed to keep their secret from everyone? The checks came from a Miami bank because he'd never left Miami. The vague details about Charlotte because he'd never been to Charlotte. The short visits because he was managing 2 households, 2 lives, 2 performances. And Linda's increased presence in my life these past 6 years, that wasn't renewed sisterly affection. That was monitoring, making sure I wasn't getting suspicious, keeping tabs on what I knew or suspected, all while sleeping with my husband under my nose. The sun set, and I sat in the darkening kitchen, not bothering to turn on the lights. I heard my phone ring several times, saw Linda's name flash on the screen, and I didn't answer. I couldn't talk to her, not yet, not while I was still processing the layers of deception. I needed to think. I needed to plan. Because here's what I understood in those dark hours. I could scream, I could confront, I could fall apart. Or I could be smart, I could be strategic, I could make sure that when I did confront them, I had every advantage, every piece of evidence, every card in my hand instead of theirs. I was 70 years old, and I'd spent most of my life being nice, being accommodating, being the woman everyone expected me to be. But that woman was gone now. Burned away by the truth Mrs. Chen had innocently delivered. What was left was something harder, something clearer, something that finally understood that kindness extended to people who betrayed you was just another word for being a fool. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Missed your call today? Everything okay?" I stared at those words, at the carefully maintained lie, and I typed back, "Everything's fine, just tired. Talk tomorrow." Then I turned off my phone, sat in my dark kitchen with the ghost of gardenia still perfuming the air, and confident, I started planning. Not revenge exactly. Justice, truth, the end of a performance that had gone on far, far too long. I woke up Wednesday morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, like someone had cleaned windows I didn't know were dirty. The first thing I did was turn on my phone and look up private investigators in Miami. Not to hire one yet, but to understand what they could do, what kind of evidence they could gather, what it would cost. I needed facts, documentation, proof that would be undeniable. But I also needed to be careful. If Thomas or Linda suspected I knew, they might cover their tracks, create some story that would make me look paranoid or unstable. I'd seen enough television to know that the person who looked crazy was usually the person telling the truth in a situation where everyone else was invested in the lie. So I played my part. When Linda called that afternoon, I answered with the same voice I'd been using for 6 years, pleasant and unsuspecting. We chatted about nothing, and I told her about the library book sale I was organizing, and she told me about a difficult client, and neither of us mentioned Thomas. The absence of his name in our conversation felt pointed now, like a space they'd both learned to navigate around. "Want to grab lunch on Friday?" Linda asked, and I could hear something in her voice, a slight tension that maybe had always been there, but I was only now trained to hear. "That sounds lovely," I said, and sarcastic, meant it in a way she wouldn't understand until later. I spent Thursday doing research. I drove the areas of Miami I thought Thomas might be living in, middle-class neighborhoods where a construction supervisor's salary could afford a decent place. I wasn't looking for him specifically, not yet, but I was getting a feel for the geography of my ignorance. Coral Gables, where Linda had her condo, Coconut Grove, South Miami, all within a 12-mile radius of our house in Kendall. 12 miles. He'd been 12 miles away while I thought he was 800 miles north. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. At a red light on Coral Way, I saw a couple walking hand in hand, both around my age, and I felt something break in my chest. Not my heart, that had already broken, but some last illusion about what my marriage had been. Thomas and I had never walked hand in hand. We'd walked side by side, parallel, but never quite together. Maybe that's why the lie had been so easy for him. There hadn't been much truth to displace in the first place. Friday's lunch with Linda was a revelation in its own way. We met at a Cuban restaurant in Little Havana, one of her favorites, and I watched her across the table with new eyes. She was 64 now, still attractive, still that same restless energy I remembered from childhood. But there was something else now, a kind of satisfied confidence that I recognized with a jolt. She thought she'd won something. She thought she'd taken something from me and gotten away with it. "You seem different today," she said, studying me over her café con leche. "More relaxed or something." "Do I?" I smiled at her, a real smile, because I understood something she didn't. I was already 3 steps ahead of her. Maybe I'm just enjoying my life more. Thomas has been gone so long, I've gotten used to doing things my own way. Something nervous flickered in her eyes, quick and nervous. "You ever think about asking him to come home sooner? I mean, 6 years is a long time." "Oh, he says he'll be home by fall," I said, watching her face carefully. "Says this project is finally wrapping up." Her expression did something complicated, a micro movement of muscles that told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't expected that. Whatever arrangement she and Thomas had, it didn't include him moving back home in the fall. That's great, Evie," she said, using the childhood nickname she'd barely used in decades. "You must be excited." "Thrilled," I said, and let the silence stretch between us. Let her sit with whatever anxiety my news had created. We finished lunch with small talk that felt like a fencing match, each of us probing for weaknesses, each of us pretending everything was normal. When she hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, I smelled that cologne again, and this time I placed it. It was Thomas's brand, the same one he'd worn our entire marriage. She was wearing my husband's cologne in broad daylight while having lunch with his wife, and she thought I didn't notice? The audacity of it, the sheer arrogance, fed something cold and determined in my chest. That weekend, I hired the private investigator. His name was Marcus Rivera, 50-something, ex-police, came recommended by a lawyer friend from church. I met him at a Starbucks in Coral Gables and laid out the situation simply. My husband claimed to be working in North Carolina, but had been spotted in Miami with a woman I believed to be my sister. I needed proof. I needed documentation. I needed photographs and addresses and evidence that would hold up if this went to court. Marcus didn't look surprised or judgmental, just nodded and took notes. "How long do you need the surveillance?" he asked. "However long it takes to get undeniable proof," I said, "and I need it done discreetly. They can't know they're being watched." "They never do," he said, and something about his quiet competence made me feel less alone in this. I paid his retainer in cash, money I'd been saving in a separate account for years, mad money Mama had taught me to always keep hidden. "You never know when you might need to leave fast," she'd said. Though I don't think she imagined I'd use it to fund an investigation into my own husband. The waiting was hard. Marcus said it might take a week or 2 to establish patterns, find where Thomas was living, document their comings and goings. I spent those days maintaining my normal routine, volunteering at the library, going to church, answering Linda's calls and texts with the same bland pleasantness I'd perfected over decades. But inside, I was changing. Every day that passed, every lie I swallowed without choking on it made me harder, sharper, more focused on what needed to happen. I started thinking about practicalities, finances, property, what a divorce at 70 would look like. I consulted with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Mendez, who specialized in gray divorce, as she called it. She explained Florida's equitable distribution laws, community property, pension rights, all the financial realities of ending a 44-year marriage. "Do you want to pursue this?" she asked, watching me carefully. "Not yet," I said, "but soon. I'm gathering evidence first. She nodded approvingly. Smart. Come back when you're ready to file, and we'll make sure you're protected. If you're still watching, if this story is resonating with you, I need to ask you something. Hit that like button if you think betrayal like this deserves consequences. And drop a comment telling me what you would do in this situation. Would you confront immediately, or would you plan first? Your engagement keeps stories like mine reaching other women who need to know they're not alone in facing these kinds of betrayals. 10 days after I hired Marcus, he called me. I have what you need, he said simply. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I drove to his small office in a strip mall on Kendall Drive, my hand steady on the wheel, my mind already bracing for whatever I was about to see. Marcus had a folder on his desk, thick with papers and photographs, and when he opened it, my entire false life spilled out in glossy 8x10 prints. There was Thomas walking out of a condo building in Coral Gables, looking relaxed and healthy. There was Linda joining him on the sidewalk, linking her arm through his. There they were grocery shopping together, exactly like Mrs. Chen had described. There they were at a restaurant, sitting on the same side of the booth like young lovers. There they were loading bags into a car, Thomas's car, the same truck he'd supposedly driven to North Carolina 6 years ago. But the absolute worst was the photograph of them kissing on the balcony of what Marcus identified as Linda's condo. My husband and my sister embracing in the afternoon sunlight, clearly comfortable, clearly established, clearly living a life that had nothing to do with duty or deception and everything to do with choice. The condo is registered in your sister's name, Marcus said, sliding paperwork across his desk. He's been living there for at least 6 years, based on what the neighbors told my operative. They know him as Linda's husband. Everyone thinks they're married. Husband, I repeated, and the word tasted like poison. Most of the neighbors don't even know your sister has a sister, Marcus continued. She's told people she's an only child. And your actual husband hasn't worked for any construction company in North Carolina. I checked. He's been doing freelance consulting work here in Miami, cash jobs mostly, probably to avoid a paper trail. The money he sent me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Probably Linda's money mixed with his freelance income. She makes good money in real estate. They were basically both funding your household to keep you from asking questions. So that was it. They'd bought my ignorance with my own money. Or money they decided I deserved as some kind of payment for staying quiet and out of the way. I was a problem they'd solved with monthly checks and weekly phone calls. A loose end they'd tied up neatly and tucked away in Kendall while they built their real life 12 miles away. I looked through the rest of the folder. Utility bills in both their names, photographs showing Thomas entering and leaving the condo at odd hours over the past 10 days, witness statements from neighbors, credit card receipts from restaurants and stores. Marcus had built an undeniable case, documented their life together in excruciating detail. I'm sorry, Marcus said quietly. I know this isn't easy to see. Don't be sorry, I heard myself say. You've given me exactly what I needed, the truth, finally. I paid him the balance of his fee, took the folder, and drove home with the evidence of my disgusted toxic passenger. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. Instead, I felt something clicking into place, a final piece of understanding that made everything clear. They'd made a choice, both of them, to prioritize their comfort and desire over any sense of honor or family loyalty. They'd chosen each other and chosen to keep me in the dark, chosen to let me live a half-life based on lies. And now I had to choose too. Not whether to end this, that decision was already made, but how to end it. How to make sure that when this was over, I walked away with my dignity intact, and they walked away understanding exactly what they'd thrown away. That night, I called Thomas. It was Sunday, our regular call time, and he answered on the third ring with his usual greeting. "Hey there, sweetheart. How's your week been?" The casual endearment, spoken while he was probably sitting in Linda's condo, maybe with her in the next room, made my disgusted stomach turn. But I kept my voice steady, warm even. "Fine, honey. Listen, I've been thinking. It's been 6 years, and I miss you terribly. I want to come visit, just for a long weekend. Surely you can take a few days off." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds too long. "Oh, Evie, that's not really a good time right now. The project is in a critical phase, and I'm working 14-hour days. You wouldn't even see me." "I don't mind," I pressed, adding just a hint of hurt to my voice. "I could explore Charlotte on my own, have dinner ready when you get back to your place. It would be nice, wouldn't it? Like old times?" "It's just, my apartment is tiny, barely room for me, and the area isn't safe for you to be walking around alone." The lies came smoothly, practiced. How many times had he rehearsed these excuses? How about, "I try to come home in August instead. Would that work?" "I suppose," I said, letting disappointment color my tone. "I just miss my husband, that's all." "I miss you too, baby. Just a couple more months, and I'll be home for good. We'll start that retirement we've been planning." After we hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand, marveling at the ease of his deception. He'd looked me in the eye, metaphorically speaking, and lied without hesitation. And Linda, my sister, had been doing the same thing for 6 years. The magnitude of it, the calculated nature of it, was almost impressive in its audacity. I pulled out the folder Marcus had given me and looked through it again, this time with clinical detachment. I studied the photographs, the addresses, the timeline he'd constructed, and I started making my own timeline, mapping out exactly how this was going to end. First, I needed to secure my finances. I made an appointment with my bank for Monday morning and opened a new account that only I had access to. I transferred half of our joint savings, which was legally my right, and set up automatic deposits for my Social Security check. I made copies of every financial document I could find in Thomas's home office: bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, everything that showed what we'd built together over 44 years. Then I called Patricia Mendez, the divorce lawyer, and made an appointment for Tuesday. "I'm ready to file," I told her. "Do you have evidence?" she asked. "Enough to wallpaper the courthouse," I said, and I heard her smile through the phone. Tuesday afternoon, I sat in Patricia's office and went through everything with her. She reviewed Marcus's photographs, read through the investigator's report, examined our financial documents. When she looked up, her face was grim but determined. "Mrs. Parker, you have one of the most clear-cut cases of adultery and deception I've seen in 20 years of practice. In Florida, while we're a no-fault divorce state, evidence of adultery can still impact alimony, asset distribution, and other factors. You're entitled to at least half of all marital assets, possibly more given the circumstances." "I don't want more than what's fair," I said. "I just want what's mine, and I want them to understand that actions have consequences." "They will," Patricia assured me. "Believe me, they will." We spent the next 2 hours planning the filing strategy. Patricia would prepare all the divorce papers, listing adultery as grounds, even though technically we didn't need grounds in Florida. But she wanted it on record, wanted Thomas to have to face that word in legal documents. We'd file on Thursday, and Thomas would be served with papers by Friday at the latest. "What about your sister?" Patricia asked. "Any legal recourse there?" "No," I said slowly. "Linda's punishment won't be legal. It'll be knowing that she destroyed our family for a man who was already looking at younger women in those photographs you saw. Did you notice? In the restaurant pictures, Thomas is checking out the waitress." Patricia had noticed. "Cheater's gonna cheat," she said simply. "He left you for her. Eventually, he'll leave her for someone else. That's his pattern." "And she'll be exactly where I am now," I said. "Except she won't have family to fall back on because I'm done with her. That's her consequence, living with what she chose and discovering it was built on sand." I left Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The plan was in motion, the wheels were turning, and soon, very soon, Thomas and Linda would discover that the quiet, accommodating Evelyn they'd been deceiving wasn't as powerless as they'd assumed. Wednesday, I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I went shopping for myself. Not practical shopping for groceries or household items, but frivolous, selfish shopping for things I wanted. I bought new clothes, things that made me feel pretty and powerful. I got my hair cut and colored, covering the gray I'd let grow in. I treated myself to a manicure and pedicure. I was preparing for battle, and I wanted to look like a woman who knew her worth. That afternoon, Linda called. "Want to grab dinner Friday? There's a new place in the Grove I've been wanting to try." "I can't Friday," I said smoothly. "I have plans. Actually, Linda, I'm going to be pretty busy for the next few weeks. I'll call you when things settle down." "Oh," she sounded surprised, uncertain. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," I said. And for the first time in our conversation, I meant it. I'm just finally taking care of some things I should have handled a long time ago. After I hung up, I allowed my small smile. She'd know soon enough. They both would. Thursday morning, Patricia filed the divorce papers. By Thursday afternoon, I had my copy, official and legal, dissolving a marriage that had been hollow for longer than I'd wanted to admit. The papers listed everything: adultery, abandonment, deception, and they requested an equitable distribution of all assets, spousal support, and anything else the court deemed fair. Friday, I waited. Patricia had hired a professional process server who would deliver the papers to Thomas at Linda's condo. She timed it for early afternoon, when her surveillance suggested they'd both be home. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. Thomas. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Then Linda called. Voicemail. Then Thomas again, and again, and again. By 3 p.m., I had 14 missed calls and a text from Thomas that simply said, "Call me now." I didn't call. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my back porch looking at those gardenias Thomas had planted, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. Peace. Real, genuine peace. Not the false calm of ignorance, but the hard-won peace of someone who'd faced the truth and decided to do something about it. My phone kept ringing. I turned off the sound and watched the sunset over my garden, my house, my life that was finally mine again. The weekend was chaos that I experienced from a distance, like watching a storm through a window. Thomas called 43 times, Linda called 37. They left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to desperate to pleading. I didn't listen to any of them. I didn't need to. I knew what they'd say. It wasn't what it looked like. I didn't understand. They could explain. Please, just call back. But there was nothing to explain. The photographs explained everything. The investigator's report explained everything. 6 years of lies explained everything. And I was done with explanations, done with their version of events, done with being the woman they manipulated and dismissed. On Sunday, Patricia called to let me know Thomas had retained a lawyer, some guy named Davidson, who apparently specialized in difficult divorces, which I supposed was one way to describe a situation where you get caught living with your wife's sister after faking a relocation for 6 years. They're going to try to claim it wasn't adultery since you were separated, Patricia said. Separated by his choice and his lies, but separated, Davidson might argue that affects asset distribution. Let him argue, I said calmly. We have photographs proving the affair started before he left. Or at least right when he left. The timeline is clear. Actually, Patricia said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, I have something better. I pulled your phone records going back 7 years. Your husband's calls to you came from Miami cell towers the entire time. Not once did his phone ping off a North Carolina tower. He never left Miami, Mrs. Parker, not for a single day. The completeness of the deception should have hurt more, but instead I felt vindicated. They hadn't just lied, they'd constructed an elaborate, detailed, ongoing fraud. And now that fraud was documented, time-stamped, and admissible in court. Monday morning, I finally listened to one of Linda's voicemails, the most recent one. Her voice was thick with tears, desperate and broken. Evie, please, please call me back. I know you're upset, but it's not what you think. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened. We fell in love, and we didn't know how to tell you. Please, you're my sister. We need to talk about this. You can't just throw away our whole family over this. Call me back, please. I deleted the message and blocked her number. She was right about one thing. I couldn't throw away our whole family over this. But she'd already done that 6 years ago when she decided my husband was more important than her sister. I was just acknowledging reality. That afternoon, I went to the bank and closed out all joint credit cards, leaving Thomas with no access to our shared credit. I changed the locks on our house in Kendall. I had the utilities transferred solely into my name. I was systematically separating my life from his, cutting the ties that had bound us for 44 years, and it was surprisingly easy. Maybe that's what happens when you realize the ties were already severed. You're just making it official. Tuesday, Thomas showed up at the house. I saw his truck pull into the driveway from my living room window, watched him try his key and find it didn't work, watched him knock on the door and call my name. I didn't answer. I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and let him knock until he gave up, until he got back in his truck and drove away. The man I'd spent most of my life with was now just an unwanted visitor at the door. Patricia advised me not to engage with him directly, to let all communication go through the lawyers. He's going to try to charm you, manipulate you, make you doubt what you know. Don't give him the opportunity. But Wednesday afternoon, I decided I needed to see them one more time, not to reconcile, not to listen to excuses, but to let them see what they'd created, a woman who discovered her strength in their betrayal. I drove to Linda's condo in Coral Gables, the address burned into my memory from Marcus's report. I'd called ahead, told Linda I was ready to talk, heard the relief in her voice. When I arrived, they were both there, sitting in her living room like they'd been waiting for an execution, which, in a way, they were. Linda looked terrible, her face drawn and aged, eyes red from crying. Thomas looked angry and defensive, arms crossed over his chest. And I looked like a woman who just had the best haircut of her life and knew exactly what she was worth. "Evelyn," Thomas started, standing up. "Thank God you're finally here. We need to talk about this crazy divorce filing. You can't seriously think." "Sit down, Thomas," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him obey. "I'm not here to listen to you. I'm here to tell you how this is going to go." I stayed standing, looking down at both of them, these two people who'd shared my life and chosen to betray it. I know everything. I've known for 3 weeks. I hired a private investigator, and I have photographs, records, witness statements, everything I need to prove you've been living together for 6 years while Thomas pretended to work in a state he's never set foot in. Linda made a small sound, something between a sob and a gasp. Thomas's face went pale. "I know you've been telling people you're married," I continued, looking at my sister. "I know you told neighbors you're an only child. I know every restaurant you've eaten at, every grocery store you've shopped at, every lie you've told. And now I'm going to do what you both should have done 6 years ago. I'm going to tell the truth." "Evie, please," Linda started, but I held up my hand. "You're not my sister anymore. A sister doesn't sleep with her sister's husband. A sister doesn't help construct an elaborate lie that steals 6 years of someone's life. You made your choice, Linda. You chose him. And now you get to live with that choice, with the knowledge that your whole family will know what you did, with the reality that when he gets tired of you, and he will, you'll be alone, because I will never forgive you." Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just a cold clarity. I turned to Thomas. "And you. 44 years of marriage, and you threw it away for what? Excitement? A younger woman? The thrill of getting away with something? I hope it was worth it, Thomas, because you're going to pay for it. Not just financially, though you'll definitely pay financially, but everyone we know, everyone at church, everyone in our community, they're all going to know exactly what you did. I'm not protecting your reputation anymore." "You can't do this," Thomas said, finally finding his voice. "You can't destroy my life because you're bitter about us finding happiness." "I'm not destroying your life," I said calmly. "You destroyed it yourself. I'm just refusing to help you hide the ruins anymore. There's a difference." I walked to the door, then turned back one more time. "Oh, and Thomas, those gardenias you planted for our 30th anniversary, I'm ripping them out next week and planting something new, something that's actually mine." And then I left, walked out of that condo and that chapter of my life, and I didn't look back. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the inevitability of a freight train. Thomas tried everything. His lawyer filed motions claiming I was being vindictive, that the separation had been mutual, that we should seek mediation instead of litigation. But Patricia shut down every attempt with the cool efficiency of someone who knew she had the winning hand. "Your client committed adultery with his wife's sister for 6 years while fraudulently claiming to work out of state," she wrote in one response. My client is entitled to a fair distribution of marital assets and has no interest in mediation with a proven liar. The legal language was harsh, but it was also true, and truth was the only weapon I needed anymore. I'd thought the confrontation at Linda's condo would bring me closure, but the real closure came in smaller, stranger moments. Like the morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Thomas first thing. Or the afternoon I laughed at something on television and understood that the sound was real, not performed. Or the evening I made dinner for just myself and felt happy instead of lonely. My church community rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Pastor Michael, who'd known Thomas and me for 20 years, came to visit one afternoon, and I told him everything. I showed him the photographs, the evidence, the documented lies. I watched his face go from shock to anger to something like grief. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn," he said finally. "I never would have suspected. Thomas always seemed so devoted." "He was devoted," I said, "just not to me." Word spread through the congregation the way it does in tight communities, and suddenly I wasn't the pathetic abandoned wife anymore. I was the woman who'd been wronged and was standing up for herself. Women I'd known for years started calling, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. Men my age, widowers and divorcees, started appearing at church events, being kind and attentive in ways that felt both flattering and overwhelming. "You've got options now." My friend Carol told me one Sunday after services, "You're free, Evie, maybe for the first time in your life." She was right. I'd gone from my father's house to my husband's house without ever really living on my own terms. And now, at 70 years old, I was finally independent. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The court date was set for early August. Patricia assured me it would be straightforward, that Thomas's lawyer knew he had no real defense, that we'd likely reach a settlement before it went to trial. But I wanted the trial. I wanted a judge to hear what he'd done, to make it official record, to ensure that this wasn't just quietly swept away. During this time, I did something else I'd been thinking about. I reached out to Patricia, my youngest sister. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 15 years. Our connection worn away by distance and life's demands. I found her on Facebook, living in Portland with her husband and 2 grown kids, and I sent her a message explaining what had happened. She called me the next day, her voice thick with anger and disbelief. "Linda did what? With your husband? Oh my God, Evie, I'm so sorry. I always knew she was selfish, but this..." We talked for 2 hours, reconnecting over the wreckage of our family. Patricia offered to come to Miami for the court date to stand with me, and I accepted. I needed family, real family. People who understood loyalty and love weren't just convenient words. 3 days before the court date, Thomas showed up at my door again. This time, I opened it, keeping the screen door locked between us. He looked older than I remembered, worn down by stress and consequences. "Evelyn, please, can we just talk without the lawyers, without all this legal mess?" Desperate. "What would we talk about, Thomas?" "About how we can fix this, about how we can move past it. We've been married 44 years. That has to count for something." I studied his face, looking for the man I'd married, but he wasn't there. Maybe he'd never been there. Maybe I'd married an idea and spent 4 decades trying to make it real. "It counts for exactly half of everything we own," I said. That's what 44 years of marriage is worth when one person decides to throw it away. I didn't throw it away, he said, and had the audacity to look hurt. Things just happened. Linda and we connected in a way that— Stop, I interrupted. I don't care about your connection with Linda. I don't care about your justifications or explanations. You made choices, Thomas. Conscious, deliberate choices every single day for 6 years. You chose to lie to me every Sunday on the phone. You chose to cash those checks I deposited. You chose to live with my sister while keeping me on hold. And now I'm making a choice. I'm choosing to be done with you. You'll regret this, he said, and I couldn't tell if it was a threat or a prediction. The only thing I regret, I said clearly, sarcastic, is not seeing through you sooner. But better late than never, right? I closed the door, locked it, and walked away from him for what I knew would be the last time as his wife. The court date arrived on a Tuesday morning, humid and bright, typical Miami in August. I wore a navy dress that Patricia Mendez had helped me pick out, professional and dignified. My sister Patricia flew in the night before, and, hopeful, she sat beside me in the courtroom, her hand gripping mine. Thomas sat on the other side with his lawyer Davidson. And Linda was conspicuously absent. Patricia had told me that while Linda wasn't a defendant in the divorce, she'd likely be called as a witness if it went to trial. Apparently, she'd decided not to show up for the preliminary hearing, probably afraid of what she'd have to say under oath. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Carolyn Martinez, who had a reputation for being fair but unsympathetic to deception. She reviewed the case file, looked at the evidence Patricia had submitted, and listened to opening statements from both lawyers. Davidson tried his best, arguing that the separation had been by mutual agreement, that Thomas had sent money home faithfully, that the adultery, while regrettable, shouldn't impact asset distribution since the marriage had been functionally over before it began. Patricia stood up, and her voice was ice. Your Honor, the marriage was not functionally over. My client believed her husband was working in North Carolina. She believed they were maintaining a long-distance marriage with plans to reunite. She was not aware that he was living 12 miles away with her sister. This is not a case of mutual separation. This is a case of fraud, deception, and betrayal of the most calculated kind. She presented the photographs, the phone records showing all calls came from Miami, the investigator's report, witness statements from neighbors. She painted a picture so clear and damning that I saw angry Judge Martinez's expression harden. When Patricia sat down, I felt a surge of gratitude for her competence, her anger on my behalf, her refusal to let Thomas's lawyer spin this into something it wasn't. Judge Martinez looked at Thomas directly. Mr. Parker, did you or did you not tell your wife you were relocating to North Carolina for work? Thomas stood, uncomfortable. Yes, Your Honor, but— Did you, in fact, relocate to North Carolina? No, Your Honor, but the situation was complicated. Mr. Parker, yes or no answers, please. Did you live with Mrs. Parker's sister for the past 6 years? Yes, Your Honor. Did Mrs. Parker know about this arrangement? A pause. No, Your Honor. Judge Martinez made a note, her face expressionless but her disapproval clear. I've seen many divorce cases in my years on the bench, but this level of deception is extraordinary. Mr. Davidson, unless you have evidence that contradicts anything presented here, I'm inclined to rule in Mrs. Parker's favor on all counts. Davidson tried to argue about the mutual agreement again, but Judge Martinez cut him off. Counsel, your client lied to his wife for 6 years about his whereabouts while conducting an affair with her sister. There is no interpretation of these facts that paints him in a sympathetic light. I suggest you work with Mrs. Parker's attorney to reach a fair settlement, because if this goes to trial, I can assure you the outcome will not be favorable for your client. The hearing lasted another hour, working through financial details, property division, alimony discussions. In the end, Judge Martinez ordered a settlement conference for the following week and made it clear that if an agreement wasn't reached, she'd decide the matter herself, and her decision would be heavily influenced by Thomas's egregious breach of marital trust. Walking out of that courtroom, my sister Patricia beside me and my lawyer behind us, I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about being seen, being heard, being validated by an impartial authority who looked at the facts and said, "You were wronged, and that matters." We went to lunch after. Patricia, the lawyer, Patricia, my sister, and me, 3 women celebrating justice not yet fully delivered, but clearly on the horizon. We ordered wine and expensive entrees, and we, happy, toasted to truth, to family, to starting over. "You know what the best part is?" my sister Patricia said, her eyes bright. Sarcastic, Linda thought she'd won. She thought she'd gotten away with it, and now she's going to watch everything fall apart, and she'll know it's because of what she did. "I don't even care about her anymore," I said, and realized it was true. She's a stranger to me now. Whatever consequences she faces are between her and her conscience. "Does she have a conscience?" Patricia asked dryly, and we all laughed, dark humor that felt earned. The following week, Thomas's lawyer called Patricia to negotiate a settlement. They knew they'd lose in court, and they wanted to avoid the public spectacle of a trial. The offer started coming in. Thomas would keep his pension and some personal assets, but I'd get the house in Kendall, most of our savings, and substantial alimony for the rest of my life. They were trying to buy my silence, trying to avoid having every detail spelled out in court documents that would become public record. Patricia advised me to consider it. "You'll get more money this way and less stress. A trial is emotionally exhausting even when you win." I thought about it for 2 days, weighing the financial security against the satisfaction of public vindication. In the end, I accepted the settlement, but with one condition. Thomas had to sign a document admitting to the adultery and deception. I wanted it in writing, notarized and official, that he lied and betrayed our marriage, not for the court, but for me, for the record, for history. He signed it. That told me everything I needed to know about how desperate he was to avoid a trial. The divorce was finalized on September 15th, 2 months after that first court date. I signed the papers in Patricia Mendez's office, my hand steady, my heart calm. 44 years of marriage dissolved in signatures and stamps and legal language, and when it was done, I felt lighter than I had in decades. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked, watching me carefully. "Free," I said simply. "For the first time since I was 24 years old, I'm completely free." The months after the divorce became a strange period of rediscovery, like being reborn with 70 years of memory intact. I started doing things I'd never done before, things I'd put off or dismissed or never even considered because I'd always been Thomas's wife first and Evelyn second. I took a cooking class and learned to make Thai food, which Thomas had always refused to try. I joined a book club at the library and discovered I had opinions about literature that didn't need anyone's approval. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women navigate the legal and emotional complexities of leaving abusive or deceptive relationships. My story gave them hope, proof that it's never too late to choose yourself. The house in Kendall became truly mine. I repainted every room, colors Thomas would have hated, bright and bold and unapologetically cheerful. I ripped out those gardenias and planted a butterfly garden instead, native Florida flowers that attracted monarchs and swallowtails. I turned Thomas's home office into an art studio and took up painting, something I'd loved in high school but abandoned when I got married because Thomas thought it was a waste of time. Financially, I was more secure than I'd ever been. The settlement had been generous. Probably because Thomas knew how badly he'd look in court. And I'd invested wisely with the help of a financial advisor Carol recommended. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, able to travel and indulge in small luxuries and not worry about every penny. My church community remained supportive, though there was inevitable gossip. Some people couldn't resist speculating about whether I'd driven him away or if there had been problems in the marriage all along. But confidently, most people, especially the women, understood. They'd seen enough, lived enough to know that sometimes the person you trust most is the person hiding the biggest secrets. Thomas and Linda stayed together, as far as I knew. I didn't keep track, didn't ask, didn't care. They'd become characters in a story I'd finished reading. Sometimes Carol would report something she'd heard through the community grapevine, that they'd moved to Fort Lauderdale, that Thomas was having health problems, that Linda had lost some major real estate clients when word got out about the affair. But I'd just nod and change the subject. Their consequences were their own to live with. My sister Patricia visited twice more that year, and we rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. She met my friends, attended church with me, helped me paint my bedroom a gorgeous sage green. We talked about our childhood, about Linda, about how families can fracture in ways you never see coming. "Do you ever miss her?" Patricia asked one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. Linda, I mean. "I miss who I thought she was," I said honestly. "But that person never really existed. The real Linda, the one who could do what she did, I don't miss her at all. She's a stranger with a familiar face." "She tried to call me," Patricia admitted, "last month." I didn't answer. "That's your choice to make," I said. "I won't tell you how to handle your relationship with her. But for me, she's gone. Serious? I have no sister named Linda anymore." Patricia nodded, understanding. Some betrayals don't heal. Some doors, once closed, stay locked forever. I started dating in the spring, which felt both ridiculous and exhilarating. Men my age, widowers mostly, some divorcees, asked me to dinner or movies or just coffee. I said yes to some, no to others, and discovered I had preferences and standards I'd never articulated before. I didn't need a man, which made it easier to enjoy their company without desperation or compromise. I went on a cruise to the Caribbean with Carol and 2 other friends from church, and we danced and gambled and laughed like women half our age. I hiked part of the Appalachian Trail with a seniors group, pushing my 70-year-old body to do things I'd thought were beyond me. I took a pottery class and made lopsided bowls that I loved precisely because they were imperfect. My life, it turned out, was full of possibility once I stopped waiting for someone else's permission to live it. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you for something. If you've made it this far, if you've stuck with me through all of this, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from or what part of this story resonated with you most. Your support helps stories like mine reach other women who need to hear that it's never too late, that betrayal doesn't define you, that you can rebuild your life at any age. Thank you for being here with me today. Now, sitting here at 70 years old, looking back on the wreckage and reconstruction of my life, I understand things I couldn't have grasped at 30 or even 60. I understand that some people are fundamentally incapable of honesty, not because they're evil, but because they're weak. Thomas wasn't a monster. He was a coward who chose the easy lie over the hard truth over and over until the lies became his reality. I understand that betrayal says everything about the betrayer and nothing about the betrayed. Linda didn't steal my husband because I was inadequate. She did it because she was broken in ways I'll never fully comprehend. Some people take what isn't theirs, not because they need it, but because the taking itself fills some emptiness inside them. That's not my burden to carry anymore. I understand that grief and liberation can coexist, that you can mourn what you lost while celebrating what you've gained. I grieved the marriage I thought I had, even though it was mostly illusion. I grieved the sister I thought I knew, even though she was mostly fantasy. But I also celebrated my freedom, my strength, my capacity to start over when most people think it's too late. The biggest lesson, though, is this. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. I spent 69 years of my life believing that my purpose was to support, accommodate, and nurture others. I was a dutiful daughter, a supportive wife, a generous sister. And where did it get me? Living in a house full of lies, married to a ghost, betrayed by the people I loved most. Now, at 70, I'm living for myself. I'm selfish in the best way, protective of my time and energy, careful about who I let into my life and how much of myself I give away. And happier than I've been in decades, maybe happier than I've ever been, because this happiness is real. It's not performed or pretended or built on someone else's approval. It's mine, wholly and completely mine. To the women watching this, especially those of you who are facing your own betrayals, your own late-life reckonings, I want you to hear this. It's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself, to demand the truth, to walk away from situations that diminish you. Age doesn't disqualify you from starting over, from building something new, from claiming the life you deserve. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's hard. Yes, there will be people who judge you or question you or tell you to forgive and forget for the sake of peace. But peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's just a prettier prison. Real peace comes from living authentically, from aligning your actions with your values, from refusing to accept treatment that violates your dignity. You are not too old to leave. You are not too old to start over. You are not too old to demand better. The world will tell you otherwise. Will suggest that at our age, we should be grateful for whatever scraps of love and respect people toss our way. But I'm here to tell you that's garbage. You deserve everything. Honesty, loyalty, respect, love, and you deserve it at 70 just as much as you deserved it at 20. I think about where I'd be if Mrs. Chen hadn't seen Thomas and Linda at that grocery store, if I'd never learned the truth. I'd still be in that house, watering those gardenias, depositing those checks, living a half-life based on a complete fiction. The ignorance might have felt like peace, but it would have been empty, hollow, a waste of whatever time I have left. Instead, I'm here, whole and healed and honestly happy, proving that you can rebuild your life with whatever materials you have left. I'm proof that betrayal doesn't have to destroy you. That you can take the worst thing that's ever happened to you and use it as fuel for transformation. So if you're sitting there in a situation that doesn't honor you, in a marriage that's sustained by lies, in a family dynamic that's toxic and depleting, I want you to know you can leave. You can start over. You can choose yourself. It doesn't matter if you're 60 or 70 or 80. It doesn't matter if you've been married for 5 years or 50. It doesn't matter if everyone thinks you're crazy for wanting more. What matters is that you know deep in your bones that you deserve better. And when you make that choice, when you finally put yourself first, the people who truly love you will support you. The ones who don't, well, they've told you everything you need to know about their character and their place in your life. My name is Evelyn Marie Parker. I'm 70 years old. And I'm living proof that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be before life and other people's expectations got in the way. My husband betrayed me with my sister. They lied to me for 6 years, and they probably thought I'd never find out or never do anything about it. They underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. I hope they're happy together. I really do. Not because I'm generous or forgiving, but because I want them to have exactly what they chose. And when it inevitably falls apart, when Thomas gets bored or Linda gets insecure, or the foundation built on lies starts to crack, they'll have no one to blame but themselves. They'll have no family to fall back on, no moral high ground to stand on, nothing but the consequences of their own choices. But I'll have this, my beautiful house with its butterfly garden, my real friendships, my rebuilt relationship with Patricia, my freedom, my peace, my life on my own terms. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's what happens when you refuse to be a victim and choose to be a survivor instead. It's never too late to save yourself. It's never too late to tell the truth. It's never too late to start over. Remember that. Hold on to that. And when you're ready, when you've had enough of living someone else's version of your life, take that first step toward reclaiming your own story. You deserve it. You've always deserved it, and it's never, ever too late. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me. And if you take nothing else from this, take this. You are stronger than you think, braver than you believe, and capable of surviving things you can't imagine right now. Trust yourself, choose yourself, save yourself. It's never too late.